now at the bottom of the hour, our top story is the latest from Ukraine. Today, Russian forces led airstrikes on Kyiv. Some missiles crashed into at least one apartment building. Russia is closing in on the capital from the north, south, and east. Poland is to the west, and that's a NATO country. The Biden administration is warning that Kyiv could fall quickly, though it did not estimate just when. The Ukrainian people are clearly not going down without a fight. The Ministry of Defense is asking residents to prepare Molotov cocktails. Volunteer fighters have taken up the call to arms, patrolling parts of the capital. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has kept himself visible.
Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Всі ми тут, наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі. Слава нашим захисникам, слава нашим захисницям. Слава Україні!
This level of resistance is supported now by a new rule. Men ages 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving. They must stay behind and help fight, at least until martial law is lifted. Meanwhile, NATO has activated part of its response force to support Ukraine. This means some of its 40,000 troops will go to strategic areas around Eastern Europe, not into Ukraine, but nearby. Today's actions put pressure on other countries to do more. President Biden spoke with President Zelensky by phone. Soon after, his administration announced sanctions against Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. Those came soon after the European Union sanctioned him. And this evening, the UN Security Council voted on a resolution to condemn Russia's invasion. Russia was the only no vote. China, the United Arab Emirates, and India abstained. NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, that is southeast of Kyiv along the Dnieper River. Matt, what do you see so far? What's the latest?
Well, I mean, I want to tell you, Joshua, first of all, we wanted to bring to you our full-on live shot off the balcony, but we were visited here in our hotel by police who were very polite but heavily armed, and they told us that we could not broadcast off the balcony with our cinema quality lights, so we're doing this here inside our room in the dark because this city, Dnipro, is on blackout, as most cities are throughout all of Ukraine. You are not supposed to be showing bright lights around because they're worried about bombings. So this is the issue that we're facing now, and you're seeing this throughout the country. That is our reality on the ground. I was in Kharkiv earlier where we came under bombardment. It was pretty startling because there hadn't been that much bombardment in the center of Kharkiv, and that's the second largest city in Ukraine. And then we heard some return fire, some sort of rat-a-tat from the anti-aircraft guns, and we decided we should probably just cut our losses and move down here to Dnipro, where it's a little bit safer and where the bombings and the Russian military haven't really started making an incursion into the center of the city. Joshua?
Yeah, Matt, you moved from right near the border with Russia, further south, closer to the Dnieper River, a little bit closer to Kyiv, but kind of southeast of Kyiv nonetheless. Talk about the mood where you are right now, particularly with President Zelensky continually posting on social media and that video that we just showed, basically trying to telegraph that the government is here, the government's active, and that they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the mood everywhere we've been going, and we've been kind of drifting all around eastern Ukraine, which is actually the sort of Russian-speaking part of this country. This is the territory. When Vladimir Putin talks about the connections between Ukraine and Russia, this is kind of the area that he talks about. This is the place where he says is being oppressed. This is where he sees genocide happening by the Ukrainian-speaking population centered around Kyiv into this part of the country. We're not seeing that kind of oppression. And most of the Russian speakers, the native Russian speakers that we speak to here, say they're Ukrainians. So really, in this part of the country, which is very Russian in its identity, they really do feel like they will fight and die for Ukraine. And they were roused by this speech, not just those social media posts by Vladimir Zelensky, but also this incredibly cinematic speech. It was like, Braveheart with your favorite Marvel comics, with, Independence Day, with all of that verbiage you'd see in some sort of rousing cinematic speech bringing you to the front line. And that's not so surprising for Ukrainians because, remember, Vladimir Zelensky was an actor right until he took this position as president. And so he said things tonight like, this is going to be a long, hard, difficult night, but there will be a dawn and glory to Ukraine. This is a population that really does feel as though they're under fire. And this is a population that is mobilizing to fight and die for their country. And you can feel that, even in a place like this, which is far from the front lines. Joshua?
Thank you, Matt. That's NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, southeast of Kyiv in Dnipro, Ukraine. Matt, we appreciate you making time. I'll let you turn those lights off and stay safe. Thanks very much. Let's continue now with NBC News military analyst General Barry McCaffrey. General, welcome to the program. Good to see you again.
Good to be with you again.
What is your sense of how these fights are going so far? I've heard different assessments from different people that the Russians haven't been quite as successful in their siege as perhaps they thought they were going to be, that the Ukrainians have put up more of a resistance in areas than perhaps Russia was ready to swat aside.
Well, of course, it's very difficult to get a granular tactical view of what's going on, particularly in the central battle, which will be in the east. That's where half the Ukrainian armed forces were postured. They've been dug in World War I kind of combat for 8 years. Now they're facing the onslaught from multiple directions of mobile Russian armored units. The Ukrainians don't have any air power left, near to speak. They don't have much of an air defense. They're facing 110 combat battalions of the Russian army, which are well equipped. By the way, these are not, to correct a misimpression, conscript soldiers. The majority of the fighting troops are contract soldiers. Their officers have been hardened in Syria and Georgia and Putin's other 4 invasions. So I think what I have concluded is that the Ukrainians are showing astonishing courage to start with their political leadership, never mind their soldiers. They've called up the reserves, they've called up militias. I think they have thrown the Russians off track. But again, how can they successfully defend against this multi-axis attack by modernized forces? It looks grim, and all we can do is hope that they give a bloody nose to the Russians enough to cause Putin to look for a new political calculus.
Well, with regards to what they can do, we've gotten a lot of questions from our viewers about what the rest of the world can or perhaps should do. We mentioned that NATO has decided to mobilize some of its forces and move a little closer to Ukraine. Again, not into Ukraine, but at least closer. We got a question from Mary who asked, can NATO change its required qualifications to become a member and let Ukraine in? What response would likely come from Russia? General, I think we know what the response from Russia might be. They would be positively furious, and that might make this situation much more volatile. But what is your sense of how NATO has been responding to all this and what difference that might make?
Well, of course, it makes a huge difference. And NATO was badly damaged as an alliance by President Trump, 4 years of knocking them to their knees. And I think that President Biden's team, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and others have done a remarkable job in coordinating with our allies. And NATO is now showing greater unity than we've seen in 30 years. They understand what Russian invasion would look like. So the NATO Rapid Response Force, which are now calling up, and a part of which will deploy into the eastern regions, they're not really being postured near Ukraine so much as positioned where they can indicate politically to Putin, should you invade the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, or other NATO nations, we will fight, and we will fight. So I think NATO unity has been a huge advantage. But Ukraine will fight this on their own. largely. They are not a NATO nation, obviously. They're not a European Union member. So they're going to have to take on this battle on their own.
Very briefly, before I have to let you go, there's an official Telegram channel from the Ukrainian government that described that they're facing attacks near Troyechnya, which is a neighborhood in northeastern Kyiv, and there's a resistance going on in Vasilkiv, which is about 36 kilometers outside of the city. So the fight is getting much, much closer to Kyiv. What would happen, presuming that the Russians do take the capital city? How does that change the battle? That certainly doesn't mean that the fight is just over. It's not capture the flag. It's not like if they just take Kyiv, the battle's over, right?
The central objective of the Russian armed forces is to destroy the Ukrainian armed forces, not to take these urban areas. So they'll encircle Kyiv. They could turn off the electricity grid, the energy supplies. They can use precision munitions against any government offices in the city. They'd be ill-advised to come in and fight block to block. Everybody's got a smartphone, video cameras. The notion of having it look like Stalingrad or Manila after the Japanese defense in 1945 would be a disaster for them. I think Zelensky will face a tough decision here coming up. Should he move his government out west, open the capital as a non-contested area and use passive resistance, or will they fight with Molotov cocktails and anti-tank rockets house to house with a disastrous humanitarian impact on the population?
General McCaffrey, we appreciate you talking us through what's happened so far. So thank you very much.
Good to be with you, Joshua.
Still to come tonight, Black history is made all the time, including today in Washington. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is now the first Black woman nominated to the Supreme Court. We'll tell you about her and see what senators are saying about this nominee. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Today marks 2 years since Joe Biden promised to nominate a Black woman to the Supreme Court if he became president. This afternoon, he made good on that promise, nominating Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. She's up for the seat of the retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. The president says they have a lot in common.
Someone with extraordinary character will bring to the Supreme Court an independent mind, uncompromising integrity, and with a strong moral compass and the courage to stand up for what she thinks is right. For too long, our government, our courts, haven't looked like America. And I believe it's time that we have a court that reflects the full talents and greatness of our nation with a nominee of extraordinary qualifications.
Judge Jackson grew up in Miami, raised by school teachers. Her career includes being a federal public defender and currently the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The judge described this nomination as an extraordinary honor.
If I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, I can only hope that my life and career, my love of this country and the Constitution, and my commitment to upholding the rule of law and the sacred principles upon which this great nation was founded will inspire future generations of Americans.
Judge Jackson is a distinguished Harvard graduate who edited the Harvard Law Review. So was former President Obama. And today he tweeted, quote, Judge Jackson has already inspired young Black women like my daughters to set their sights higher, and her confirmation will help them believe they can be anything they want to be, unquote. Joining us now is Georgetown law professor Cheryl Cashin. She clerked for the late Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Joshua.
What do you make of Judge Jackson's nomination? Her strengths, possibly some of her weaknesses, or anything she might have to overcome in the confirmation process? How does she look to you as a nominee?
She looks supremely qualified and incredibly inspirational. As you said in the opener, if she's confirmed, she would be the only sitting justice who has represented criminal defendants as a public defender. I believe she'd be the first public defender on the court. She'd be the only Supreme Court justice who had served on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, one of only 2 Supreme Court justices that served as a district court judge, Ketanji Brown Jackson, for nearly a decade, a trial judge. And she also would uniquely bring the lived experience of having to negotiate as a Black woman institutions and people who may have perceived her as unqualified. And that's an asset in the Supreme Court nominee, the ability to relate to and understand the lives of people who don't typically have power enhances the possibilities that their arguments will be heard, taken seriously. So I haven't seen a candidate like this since Thurgood Marshall himself was nominated, somebody who had represented a lot of ordinary people, including as a criminal defense lawyer.
Some of the criticisms of the judge are quite likely going to come from Republican lawmakers. We heard from Minority Leader Mitch McConnell today. He tweeted about the judge having published, in his words, a total of 2 opinions, both in the last few weeks. One of her prior rulings was just reversed by a unanimous panel of her present colleagues on the D.C. circuit. And he also referred to what he described as being the favorite choice of far-left dark money groups that have spent years attacking the legitimacy and structure of the court itself. That's from Senator McConnell. What do you make of some of the possible liabilities that might trip this nomination up?
This nominee has been confirmed 3 times by the U.S. Senate in a bipartisan manner. Once to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, once to the district court, and once to the Court of Appeals. Most recently, last summer. She is eminently qualified. Everything Mitch McConnell that you quoted to me, I think of as just political spin. He is going to say those things, but 3 Republicans voted for her last time. I expect those 3 senators will likely vote for her again because she's the same eminently qualified person, and there's nothing far left and radical about her. She spoke about who she would model herself on as a Supreme Court justice, the man she worked for, Justice Breyer. You know, she spoke to how she admired his ability to be civil, pragmatic, try to build consensus. And I think that's the type of person she's going to be.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that there were 3 Republican senators who voted to confirm her. The last time, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Susan Collins of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Before I have to let you go, I think we just need to talk about the fact that this is historic. I mean, not just for, people of color, South Floridians. I'm just looking at a joint statement now from the Miami-Dade County Board of Commissioners about her historic nomination. What does just the historic significance of her nomination mean to you?
Well, as a Black woman, I can't help but say that it was emotional for me watching her today. And her speech was so eloquent and so patriotic. And I felt that both what she said in her commitment to the rule of law and her belief that this country is a beacon to the rest of the world, this nomination embodies the highest ideals of this country. And it makes me feel like progress is possible on all fronts. So I'm very proud.
Georgetown Law Professor Cheryl Cashin, we appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
How much longer will Americans need to wear masks indoors? Today, the CDC updated its guidance on that for the first time since July. And for most people, there's good news. Officials say about 70% of Americans can skip indoor masking regardless of their vaccination status. And that includes in schools. Now, to be clear, this is just guidance, not law. So these are recommendations. And they're based on 3 metrics: new COVID-related hospital admissions, the percentage of hospital beds that are occupied by COVID patients, and new cases over the previous week. The pandemic has been easing in the United States for a while now. Cases and hospitalizations are declining significantly. The current 7-day average for hospitalizations is just under 6,000. About a month ago, average hospitalizations were more than 20,000. Let's talk through these new guidelines with the CDC's former director, Dr. Tom Frieden. Today, he's the president and CEO of Resolve to Save Lives, a global health initiative to prevent epidemics and cardiovascular disease. Dr. Frieden, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to speak with you.
Let's talk about this new metric that the CDC unveiled today. Basically, it's a stoplight system, green, yellow, red, for either low, medium, or high risk. Seems pretty straightforward for people to understand. And if you go to the CDC's website, you can search by county of whether your county is kind of in the green, the yellow, or the red. Tell us more about this metric and what impact you think it might have.
This is really helpful. It empowers people to know essentially how hard is it raining COVID in my community? What do I need to do if I do have an immune problem or I live with someone who has a weakened immune system? What do I do if I don't have such a problem? And what will I know if things get worse? Right now, the trend is very encouraging. We're better prepared than ever to fight COVID. Cases are plummeting, and we hope that that's going to hold. If it doesn't, we have a system that will let us know when there is a risk. Right now, we are looking forward to dropping mask mandates, dropping other kinds of limitations, getting back to more of our normal lives. But we have to recognize that COVID has surprised us before. There could be another variant, and we could go up from green to yellow to red. But that kind of empowering traffic light system allows people to know what they need to do and what they can do to protect themselves, their family, and their community.
What do you make of the CDC rolling this out now? I can only imagine how valuable it would have been for lots of us to have a metric that was this simple way earlier in the pandemic.
We know more than we've ever known about COVID, and you could say, wish it was there before, but it's there now, and the key is to use it going forward.
With regard to the other variants that might emerge, I was just going to ask you about that because according to the WHO, the Omicron variant is now the top variant in at least 18 countries. It represents just over a third of all new cases that have been genetically sequenced worldwide. How do we know, Dr. Frieden, how do we get a good sense at least of whether now is the time to kind of let up? I constantly worry about whether or not COVID got the memo that we are ready to move on from this pandemic, and it's just got another variant waiting for us around the corner that's going to send us back to square one.
It's certainly the case that COVID has surprised us before, and this virus has shown stunning ability to evolve and adapt to humans, becoming more transmissible, spreading more easily, avoiding some of our immune defenses, at least for infection. But it's also true that our vaccines are stunningly effective. They have saved hundreds of thousands of lives in the US, millions around the world. They're holding up against severe illness, hospitalization, and death very well. So if you haven't been fully vaccinated, if you're not up to date, including boosted, go out and get that done because that's important. We don't know when the next variant will come. It's also the case that we have better tracking systems than ever before. So if there is an emergence of a cluster, an outbreak, a new variant, we're more likely to catch that and catch that early than we were before. That could give us this kind of early warning system.
And by the way, I do want to note, for those of you who are here in New York, they're still offering $100 for getting vaccinated. I got a call this evening before tonight's show from someone from the city asking if I had been boosted and there was $100 in it. I'm already boosted, but there are still some incentives. So you can go to planyourvaccine.com and we can point you toward the right information. We have a little bit of breaking news on the administration's push in Ukraine. I'll get to that in just a second. But before I got to let you go, Doctor, I wonder what your sense is of whether the worst of the pandemic is behind us. A recent poll showed that 40% of Americans feel that it is. What about you?
I think it is. I think we're looking at a brighter 2022. The main thing that's in the balance now is will we learn the lesson and have a stronger public health system in this country and around the world so that the next health threat doesn't catch us so unprepared.
Former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden, appreciate you walking us through this tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, before we go, a little bit of breaking news with regard to the Biden administration's response to the attack on Ukraine. We just learned this evening that the administration will ask Congress for $6.4 billion from supplemental funds for assistance to Ukraine. The breakdown of the money is like this. $3.5 billion would go to the Department of Defense, $2.9 billion would largely go to the Departments of State and USAID, that's the U.S. Agency for International Development. Smaller amounts would go to the Departments of Commerce and Treasury. Now, it's not clear whether or not this would be tacked on to the larger overall government funding bill that has yet to be finalized, or whether this would pass separately. But again, we've learned tonight that the Biden administration is requesting more than $6 billion in supplemental funds for assistance to Ukraine. You may have noticed the biggest piece of that goes to the Defense Department. But again, the administration's been really clear. This is not about putting boots on the ground. So we'll get more details on where this money is going over the weekend, we hope. Please do stay with NBC News for the latest on our app and at NBCNews.com. If you're new to the show, if you just joined us to watch some of our Ukraine coverage, remember to follow us. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can always leave us a voicemail with your questions about the day's big stories, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@NBCnews.com. I'm back for the State of the Union address on Tuesday night, but until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thanks for making time for us. Enjoy your weekend. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.